Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're really excited for this conversation. As we give everyone just a couple minutes to settle in, can you go ahead and drop in the chat where you're calling from? It's always fun to see the range of places represented. I am calling from Denver, Colorado, and I have Grace and Amanda on the phone as well. Awesome. All over, we got out east, out west, Midwest. Everybody's represented. Awesome. Let's just take a look. All right. Looks like there's a lot of folks chiming in. All right, let's get started. So a few quick housekeeping notes before we dive in. Today's session is being recorded. We'll share the link afterward with everyone who's registered, and it'll also be posted on our social media channels. Feel free to pop in any questions into the chat at any time. We'll do our best to address them live, and if we run out of time, we'll make sure to add it to our follow-up email. And if you're not already on our mailing list, or if you'd like to share it with a colleague, be sure to sign up for our newsletter. And Kenny from our team will go ahead and drop that into the chat. All right, let's jump in. All right, let's do some quick introductions so you know who you're hearing from. I am Janelle DeCaro with Active Design Advisors. We're the operator of Fitwel certification, and I have been with the company for about 3.5 years. And I lead all of our marketing communications efforts, both for our internal teams and for our external partners. I'm really excited to introduce the others joining me today. We have Grace from the Center for Active Design, Fitwel certification body, and Amanda from Kayne Anderson, who will be sharing how their team has been using Fitwel Scale certification, what we're calling FSP, across their portfolio. Grace and Amanda, can you share a little bit about yourselves before we dive in?
Sure. Thanks, Janelle. I'll jump in. So I'm Grace Dickinson. I'm the Director of Applied Research at the Center for Active Design. On the research team, we really work to translate the public health evidence and research informed by our research library of over 4,000 articles and our research advisory board into actionable strategies to impact health for the real estate industry. I've been with CFAD for a little over 4 years, and my background is in public health and urban planning. I'll kick it to Amanda.
Thanks, Grace. Amanda Nunnink. I'm at Kayne Anderson, where I lead a attainable housing strategy. I joined about 4 years ago to launch this strategy, and I had prior to that spent a decade at Freddie Mac, which is one of the nation's largest lenders with respect to housing, particularly affordable housing. And I left because I wanted to help prove out the thesis that private capital can be a part of the solution with respect to the housing crisis that exists in our country today.
Awesome. We're so excited to have you, Amanda. Kayne Anderson was actually the first to adopt FSP, our portfolio-wide pathway designed to identify the most critical strategies for advancing both occupant health and long-term asset value. With FSP, Kayne Anderson has benchmarked performance across properties, prioritized high-impact interventions, and demonstrated measurable financial results. And by being part of the pilot cohort, they're really helping set the standard for what resilience and responsible investment look like in real estate today. All right, so we are hosting this webinar ahead of Climate Week to connect with our partners and peers as we look toward the important conversations happening in New York next week. Today's session will be very conversational. We'll dive into how Fitwel strategies are helping organizations stay competitive, reduce costs, and seize opportunities while advancing health and resilience. At its core, Fitwel puts people at the center of climate resilience. By integrating health and well-being into our operations, our certification strengthens both human and planetary health, helping communities withstand impacts while creating lasting asset value. All right, now I'd like to shift us into a conversation with Grace from the Center for Active Design. We'll set the stage here by exploring why climate change is a public health issue, the risks that communities are facing today, and how building strategies can make a measurable difference. We'll also cover the research. We'll also discover the research behind these interventions, investor returns, reintroduce FSP, and connect it back to Climate Week's focus areas: communities, biodiversity, resilience, and finance. So with that, Grace, let's dive in. Starting with the big picture, why is climate change a public health issue? What does that mean, and why does it matter?
Yeah, so I think for some time, climate change has really been thought of as a physical risk and an environmental risk, but it really is a public health risk. And I think it's well important for us to understand it that way. The consequences of climate change, from rising sea levels to increased frequencies of storms, rising temperatures, all have real human health consequences, ones we're really starting to see. I know at least this past summer, with the heat in New York, where I am. They bring with them increased risks of displacement, injury, infectious disease, the exacerbation of pre-existing chronic conditions. Heat alone has been linked to increased rates of emergency department visits for mental health related conditions, as well as a 10% increase in assaults at higher temperatures. So these are real health related consequences from what's happening with climate change. What this means is we really have to think of climate change not only in how it will impact our physical assets, but also in terms of how it will impact the people in those assets and what we can do to prepare and protect them.
Thanks. That really sets the stage. And as you're kind of going into now, what does that look like on the ground? What are the biggest what are the biggest risks that communities are facing today, and how can they be addressed? And is there anything that communities can do versus individuals?
Yeah, so risk definitely varies based on location. And I know this is something I'm sure Amanda will talk about in her experience on the ground. Some assets have to contend with wildfire risk, others with flooding, many with heat. It really depends. I would say that urban projects really should focus on limiting their heat contribution, knowing that buildings contribute so much to emissions, and thinking about how they can contribute green space to their communities or to their footprint, and how they can really reduce the urban heat island effect. At a community level, I think the planting of trees, conservation of green space and biodiversity, and stormwater management systems are all really important ways to build community resilience. Those are all big pillars of our Fitwel V3 standard.
Mhm.
On an individual level, resilience can take a number of forms. This can be preparedness, from knowing where to go and what supplies are needed in the case of an emergency, to even personal choices around supporting biodiversity through a garden or choosing active transportation options over personal vehicle transit. A comprehensive climate resilience strategy really requires both mitigation and adaptation strategies, both of which we really try to embrace in tandem in Fitwel.
Great. Yeah. So now we kind of know the risks and potential interventions. And let's dive into the evidence behind these strategies. What has actually been proven to work?
Yeah, so evidence tells us, I know I just mentioned this, but urban areas often experience higher temperatures than non-urban or rural areas. This has been a big contributor to the energy efficiency movement, as rising temperatures have been a driver of high energy costs, and why energy efficiency has become so important over the past decade. Evidence shows us that interventions that include greenery, from green roofs and walls to street trees and nearby parks, can reduce local temperatures. Effective tree coverage around buildings can reduce air conditioning needs by as much as 30%, and parks can reduce local temperatures by about 4 degrees Celsius. So this is real data showing that greenery can make a real impact, not only in the temperature and the health impacts, but also our costs in terms of energy use. As we know from the heat-related health outcomes I mentioned before, these impacts can be from safety and stress to cardiac-related conditions in terms of health. When we make these connections, we start to see how climate risks are health risks. And as we all know, real estate is really heavily impacted by the health and satisfaction of the people who occupy it.
I love how you're framing your answers that climate risks are health risks. And when we start looking at buildings through that lens, it becomes clear we're talking about resilience not just for people, but for entire communities. I actually want to take that a step further and connect it to the investment side of the conversation. A recent study from Cambridge University looked specifically at Fitwel certification and found that office properties achieved on average a 4% rental premium. And even more notable, the mean annual rent for Fitwel certified buildings came in at over $55 per square foot, which is actually higher than what we're seeing from competitors. Kenny will drop a link to that full study in the chat in case you'd like to explore that data more thoroughly. And for owners, the value shows up in operations too. Clients are seeing less absenteeism, longer tenant retention, and lower energy bills, all of which add up to a stronger net operating income. And at the same time, we're seeing demand shifting. We're now seeing it come from consumers. Residents, employees, and guests are increasingly looking for healthier spaces, and certification has become a signal of stress and quality that meets that demand. I know I see that in my generation, and I can only imagine that it's going to be more prevalent in generations to come. And one way that we are helping owners and investors measure and showcase this value, again, is through FSP. FSP provides an investor grade data that can be used for sustainability reporting and capital allocation, making the business case for resilience just as strong as the health case. Grace, could you share a bit more about FSP, how it works, and how it helps benchmark resilience across portfolios?
Yeah, sure. So, as you just shared, we're seeing significant data around how many of these strategies that we promote for health, like stormwater management, supporting biodiversity, flood and fire mitigation, can have a positive impact on financial value as well. So, FSP certification is our way of highlighting that. We've pulled out those Fitwel strategies. So, these are all strategies that have already been vetted for their health impact. And we've now looked at them and pulled those out that have a demonstrated impact on financial value. Resilience is a big part of that. We know that resilience has a strong impact on financial value and is one of those 6 targeted outcomes in FSP. In addition, since FSP is a truncated list of strategies, it's those Fitwel strategies that have the highest impact on financial value, as opposed to STAR certification. It has a number of strategies that can be applied across an entity. It's designed to be applied at scale and support reporting and progress tracking over time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that recap. That really helps us set up the conversation with Amanda. And before we move on to that conversation, can you connect the strategies used in FSP to the Climate Week focus areas, the communities, biodiversity, resilience, and finance?
Definitely. So as I mentioned, FSP has 6 targeted outcomes. They're environmental quality, resilience, stakeholder engagement, equity, active living, and biophilic design. 3 of those outcomes directly correspond to these Climate Week focus areas. Stakeholder engagement includes strategies that hone in on engaging with communities, both those within the asset and those surrounding the development, to build meaningful collaboration and trust. The biophilic design outcome includes a variety of strategies that touch on supporting outdoor ecosystems, from outdoor space conservation to the planting of trees, even an explicit strategy titled Supporting Biodiversity. Additionally, as we've spoken about at length already on this webinar, we have an outcome exclusively focused on resilience, including both climate adaptation and mitigation strategies. And finally, given that the focus of the certification is those health strategies that most impact economic returns, finance is really at the heart of this product almost as much as health is. While we didn't design FSP for Climate Week, I don't think it could encompass these themes more completely.
Exactly. And Kenny will share our starter kit for that and also our interest form. Thank you. You've really showed us the clear link between health strategies and financial returns, and how healthy building certification has shifted from a nice to have to a competitive advantage as tenants and consumers are demanding healthier, more resilient spaces. Now let's see how this plays out in the real world. Kayne Anderson has been putting these strategies into practice across their diverse portfolio using FSP to integrate health and resilience at scale. Grace, I'll hand it over to you now to dive into Amanda's experience with how theory becomes action with FSP.
Great. Thank you, Janelle. Now that I've kind of outlined our perspective, how we see resilience as a health issue and how we've worked to measure that, I'm excited to talk to you, Amanda, about how you and your team practice this. I think it's one thing to look at the research and think about it theoretically. It's another to manage it on the ground. So I'm curious, kind of to dive right in, what role resilience plays in your overall approach to portfolio management.
Well, Grace, when you said this has a direct impact on financial value, you could not be more right. And I think at Kayne Anderson, across our portfolio, we view climate risk as financial risk and we treat it as such. So part of the way we start a potential investment is by incorporating a physical climate risk analysis in the earliest stages of due diligence. And what that does is it helps us to understand the inherent risks of the site and then also the resiliency measures that might help us to mitigate those risks during our hold period. But it absolutely informs our investment interest and also strategy. So the motivation there is really thinking about the risk for us as a current potential owner and then taking a future and even longer term view because to your point, we have conviction that a more resilient asset is also a more liquid asset.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm assuming in this process, you're taking into account some of the things I was looking at in my conversation with Janelle. You know, those geographic differences that vary. You have to look at different types of impacts and different strategies are more impactful. How do you manage that?
Well, I mentioned we're thinking about it in due diligence. We have an ESGR checklist that's over 140 questions. And so we take all of that data, again, to inform decision making and strategy, but then also track potential risk across a dashboard where we're monitoring strengths, risks, and opportunities for improvement. And when I think about your question related to geography, that checklist takes into account geography, but also then we have to think about legislation in different markets at the state, MSA, city level. There are different organizations or different municipalities that might be taking different approaches. And so we need to be aware of that as we're making an investment and as we continue to invest in that asset. And what I mean by that, we're seeing municipalities offer a carrot, maybe financial incentives for work related to decarbonization, but at the same time, others are using a stick, fines, if you're not decarbonizing along a certain standard. And so this is moving really quickly, market by market. And that's part of what we're measuring in our ongoing dashboard, looking at the portfolio. I'll fold this in as we start to talk about social resiliency because I also think those needs are different based on the geography.
Yeah, that's so great. And I think it's so great you mentioned that because it really helps weave it together that you really can't take financial risk apart from climate risk. They really come together. And as I mentioned, we're seeing that on the research side as well. Choices investors are making around climate change really are financial choices. As I mentioned, for us, health is a really important part of that resilience conversation. I'm wondering for you, is health a part of that as well?
100%. I mean, we're investing in rental housing and it's with the focus that's attainable in nature. And so what that means is the residents that are living in our communities are likely service workers, healthcare professionals, teachers, law enforcement. So we view that we have a dual commitment, a commitment to the physical resiliency of the assets themselves, but also the resiliency of the residents that live in our communities. And we're taking this one step further, maybe than the multifamily industry historically has really thought about this. Amenities in multifamily historically have been access to green space, a pool, a gym, a wellness center. There's value and we offer those, and that is important to the community itself. But we're thinking about amenities a little bit different, particularly in the residents that we're serving. And that really goes to the resiliency of those residents. And so the themes for us that have emerged in terms of resident resiliency are around health and wellness, education, and economic mobility. And maybe I can just give one quick example of how we're putting this to work across the portfolio on the economic mobility front. And, that is that we report all on-time rents for our renters to all three credit bureaus so that individuals' largest monthly payment is benefiting them. And today in rental housing in the United States, there's 44 million renters. Less than 10% of them have their positive on-time rents reported. So this is likely largely going unnoticed, although the negative reporting exists for all renters. And so we're doing this at no cost to the residents. So what we found in terms of measurable outcomes is we have 99% enrollment across our residents, and we've seen credit scores increase on average by 44 points. So that really speaks to, I think, the economic mobility. And I also would point out that we're doing this through a fintech partner. Isuzu is the name of that organization. And they also communicate with residents. So residents have live tracking of their credit score. And then there's an educational component. What goes into my credit score? What could affect it, positive or negative? And I think that's really of value. And again, providing that economic mobility. We know there are challenges nationally with respect to home ownership, and one of those challenges is credit scores. To access a mortgage that is backed by Fannie or Freddie, there are high credit score standards. So for us to start moving the needle for what I would call workforce renters in this way, we think is really impactful.
No, I couldn't agree more. That's so important. And I think even in a rental market, having the capacity to feel confident that you can stay year over year in the same place and really feel secure in your housing is a really important measure for health. What we're seeing on the data side is how meaningful that is for health and education outcomes. And at a large scale, what that really means is community building and community resilience. Community building takes time in the same place with the same people. Stronger communities and a sense of belonging really means reduced levels of stress and anxiety, lowered risk of chronic disease, improved sleep, improved immune system, and ultimately longer life expectancies. Like all those things tie back to those simple acts that you're doing. So it's really amazing and really important work. And it's great to hear. So really exciting. I'm curious too to keep the conversation going. I know I mentioned you mentioned seeing some data on the tenant side and kind of some of the shift in the amenities that they're asking around. I'm curious for more specifics around what you're seeing on that tenant side. What are they asking for? And to what extent are you seeing resident demand for interventions around resilience, if at all?
Well, I'll say in workforce housing, in attainable housing, our renters are often called renters by necessity. They rent because they must. And in what I would call luxury Class A housing, those are renters by choice. They have economic mobility. Our renters aren't yet demanding a lot of what I'm talking about, but I will tell you that renters are becoming more savvy and they do know that they have choice where they live. And I'll give you two examples of places that we're seeing choice play out in a positive way, and tie it to the commitments we're making, both on the physical asset improvements and on the resident resiliency as well. So one of the assets in our portfolio is located in the Boston MSA, and it's a late 1970s vintage asset. So it is truly what I would call workforce housing. The heating and cooling when we bought this asset was the original baseboard PTAC. So kind of wall unit. It's inefficient, it's invasive, it's expensive, and it's ancient. And we, in our thesis and business plan, we are going in and we have been replacing all of that with cool climate heat pumps, which are less invasive, less noisy. We're also installing smart thermostats. And the outcome is that resident utility bills are going down, and they're going down by roughly 40%. And so our strategy was to complete these renovations to the HVAC or improvements as residents vacated their units. So a resident has decided they're no longer going to stay in the community. We take over the unit, and this is part of our upgrades in terms of turning the unit. But what's really interesting is the residents began talking about the new HVAC, the smart thermostats, and their bills going down. And so residents started to approach our on-site property management teams to say, I want the upgrade. I'm going on vacation for 3 days. Can I move into a hotel unit? We set up vacant units as hotel space and would move residents into those units while we completed the work. So the residents are as they're becoming educated about what's available to them, it is absolutely becoming something they're asking for. And perhaps more importantly for us, it's a competitive advantage. When we're leasing a unit at our community, we are sharing certified data that says the cost of utilities here is less than a competing property. So it's a competitive advantage in terms of driving new traffic and leasing. And as a result of this type of work, of the credit scoring I mentioned and other resident activations, we are seeing that retention rate that's significantly above market, Grace, like you mentioned. In the multifamily industry, retention is whether tenants stay in their unit as their lease expires. And so national average in multifamily is 55% of residents do stay, and we are retaining over 70% of our residents in our communities, which is remarkable. And what that translates to for us as owners and investors in multifamily is higher NOI. We are seeing lower cost to turn over a unit, lower marketing costs, less time for vacancy, and all of that really affects, property level NOI and ultimately investor returns. So, that data is really driving some of the work we're doing. And again, I would connect that to Grace, exactly what you described in terms of housing stability and how important that is for so many different outcomes, children's test scores, health outcomes, like you mentioned. So it's a data point that we're really proud of for the portfolio.
Yeah, no, as you should be. I love to hear that. It's really great, and it makes total sense. On the research side, we're looking at trends in the rental housing market and seeing that as this Gen Z generation moves into the rental market, there's a lot more preference and selection around things like this. They care a lot about things related to, obviously, the reduction utility costs is exciting and important, but also what is the impact on the climate, and what is going to be my footprint, and how can I kind of compare and contrast this against my other options. So it makes total sense. And we're seeing that a lot of these things like noise and air quality, all these environmental factors are making a real difference in where people are going. Even in some markets, things like noise pollution can lower residential value by up to 3%. So it all lines up with what we're seeing on our end as well. Switching gears a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about how you're monitoring and reporting all of these interventions you all are doing. It's all really exciting and amazing to hear about, but I'd love to know a little bit about how you're tracking it and monitoring it over time. Specifically, I'd love to focus on the portfolio you worked with us on this past year in our FSP pilot. I know there's a number of metrics out there to track and report all these interventions. So I'm curious, given all that you've shared, what made you to establish this as an Article 9 fund?
At the time that we launched this strategy, which is early 2022, there were not a lot of reputable or widely utilized social metrics. And so deciding to pursue the Article 9 social status really was a way to validate all of the work that we're doing with a third party.
Yeah, that's great. I know that the third party validation process is really important. It's a big reason our partners work with us. And I know that greenwashing has been a growing issue across all types of industries and reporting. And beyond the numbers, even, I'm curious on a deeper level how you're tracking the impact of the interventions you're doing.
Well, I mean, that was really one of the reasons we wanted to be a part of this Fitwel social pilot, because there still remains, I think, a lack of social benchmarks for multifamily in particular, but obviously all commercial real estate. And so we wanted to have a seat at the table and discuss our framework and opine on, opportunities we see to widely scale some of these metrics. I think an added benefit I'll say is that we also submit to GRESB, and FSP is recognized by GRESB. And being an operational certificate, it definitely provides us that extra benefit. But it's also allowing us to measure the impact we're having on residents. And so I'll just call out a few of those specific metrics that I think are really relevant. I mentioned retention. Tenure is another, how long residents are staying in our communities vis-a-vis the market. We measure affordability and relative affordability, and we think about it in terms of how affordable a unit is with respect to area median income, because that is a measure that is widely utilized by policy wonks in terms of housing affordability. And so we report out the number of units in our portfolio that are affordable at various levels of AMI. And then when we think about some of those health outcomes, we're measuring those credit scores I mentioned. Another example is the work that we're doing on health and wellness. So one of the activations in the portfolio was providing all residents access to healthcare via a virtual healthcare provider at no cost to them. And so we measure the number of residents that set up an account and then utilize those services. So those are some examples of how we're thinking about how to measure the work that we're doing.
I love that. Yeah, I think sometimes too, it's hard to follow up and say, we offer this, but what's coming from it? To be able to track and see how many people are taking the next step is important. I love to hear that. And we're on our end, I can say we're really excited about FSP. I'm glad it's been useful for you and your team. We're excited about the opportunity it affords users to set that benchmark and track progress over time, the real impacts it can have on health and financial value. Um, I also love that you, in our conversation, have mentioned how you've worked with older buildings. I think that's something we really pride ourselves on being able to work with at Fitwel, that every building has an opportunity to make a difference for its owners and occupants on health. I think there's been a trend, I know even where I live in Brooklyn, a lot of new luxury buildings that have their health and wellness and whatever certification stamp, but even older buildings can do things to impact their health. And we're excited that we have no prerequisites. Every building can do something to impact their health. And so that's really what we're excited about having in Fitwel, also in FSP. And so that's a big part of what we try to do. One final question as we wrap up, kind of taking everything you've said. I'm really excited about all the things that Kayne Anderson is doing. I think it's really great that we can start to see some of these measures that were once thought of as extra or things you do for social good, but not really for financial good, starting to be seen as not extra, but really of value. I wanted to ask, as you look ahead, where do you see opportunities to kind of further scale your approach to prioritizing health and resilience?
I would say generally the industry, particularly multifamily, there are clear measures and guidelines for reporting on waste, water, energy, and you can view your outputs there, your metrics there, vis-a-vis a peer set. There just aren't clear measures with respect to social resiliency and some of the work that we're doing. And so, again, that was why we're proud to have partnered with Fitwel for this pilot to help shape the conversation. And so I think the opportunity for us in terms of next steps, we chose 3 indicators for the last report. And I think we really shined in that stakeholder engagement field. But what we're looking at now is going back and examining what other indicators can we continue to pursue and uncover ways that we can help to meet and drive industry standards.
Great. Yeah, and I think what you mentioned about the social, it's what's been important for us. Health has always been in the center of our work, and I think thinking about occupant health is a great way for buildings to and assets in real estate to really think about how they can address that social piece. The real estate ultimately, in a lot of ways, is only as valuable as the people in it, and I think this is a great way to try to get at that. So. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights with us. It's been a real pleasure to collaborate. I love hearing all the things you all are doing. That credit score reporting is really exciting and a really innovative way to build, not only wealth management, but education and health for all your tenants. So it's really exciting. And I'm sure all our listeners enjoyed hearing your perspective on resilience, as well as your insights on your FSP experience. So thank you so much.
Of course, we're so proud to be a part of the program. And again, the work we're doing, we think, can translate to all workforce housing, not just our portfolio. So, that's one of the reasons we'd love to see these types of efforts really gain traction and scale.
Yeah, could not agree more. Awesome. I'll turn it back to Janelle to wrap it up and share some resources for everyone tuning in.
Sure. Thanks, Grace, and thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing these insights. You really have highlighted how resilience and health strategies are being integrated across portfolio management, from meeting tenant and resident demand to accounting to geographic differences and tracking impact with tools like FSP. And it's a great example of the clear business and societal value that comes from prioritizing wellness in real estate. And there's a lot of kudos to you on our chat here. All right, we can take a few minutes. I haven't seen much for Q&A come in. I think there was one that was sent earlier, just around FSP and how Kayne Anderson is using it, but I think that was all covered in our conversation here. But if you do have any questions, drop them in the chat and we can try to get to them in the next few minutes.
I see that question from Uma, and it's really about addressing opportunities in existing assets versus new development. And what I would say is I think it's so much easier in new development to really drive the design and these efforts, and it becomes a lot more challenging with respect to existing assets because it has to be a part of your business plan day one. And so for us, we think about that in due diligence, and I go back to that checklist where we're looking at efficiency of the asset prior to investing and whether or not we can achieve our goals through the investment. And that checklist helps to inform our next steps there. We also have an idea in terms of the costs to carry some of the social activations that I've mentioned, and there are more. And so we factor that into our underwriting on each and every asset. So it really takes a deep dive upfront on an asset in order to solve for, can this work in an existing property? I also saw one of the questions was, what's the name of the firm that we utilize for the credit scoring? There are many, but I'll drop the name in the chat. The one we like is called Isuzu. They're a New York-based fintech company.
Awesome. All right. Before we wrap up, I just want to quickly highlight some of the ways to get started with Fitwel certification. And Kenny will share all the links and resources in the chat so you can follow along. First is to register your project through the Fitwel platform, either via the link that we're sharing or from the button at the top right of fitwel.org. And we're also in the final days of our Submit 2025 discount, giving you 10% off certification fees. So make sure you use that code before the offer ends at the end of next week. And then check out our Help Center for resources and templates to plan your documentation. It's a great place to get familiar with all things Fitwel. We had a best practices session specifically focused on FSP last week, and Kenny will drop the YouTube link in that chat. That's a great resource to refer back to, kind of to get to understand the differences between FSP and our STAR certification, asset certification pathway. And of course, as always, reach out to us if you're unsure about any step or want to be in the know about our latest products, promotions, and updates. Our team is always happy to get you started. And again, Kenny has shared the best way to connect with us. Just double checking the chat to make sure that we've seen everything. I think we have. So thank you all so much for joining today's session. Fitwel puts people at the center of climate resilience, creating healthier buildings, stronger communities, and safer environments. And with research showing those clear financial returns, the value of prioritizing health has never been greater. Again, check your inbox soon for a follow-up email, including a recording of the webinar to revisit today's insights. And thanks again, and happy Climate Week. Bye all.
Thank you.
Thanks.